Welcome back to Journey of Self-Awareness, where we've been discussing broader categories or genres of spiritual practices, and I started to introduce the practice of making offerings to the divine. And in the last video, we learned about offerings in different cultural contexts. We discussed Bali and Thailand and Peru, for example. Now, today I'd like to direct our attention to Tibetan practices in Tibetan Buddhism. Of course, Tibet now is occupied by China, and very many Tibetan practitioners have been dispersed in a diaspora around the world. Many have landed in India and Nepal, but the legacy of Tibetan Buddhism lives on, and it has gained perhaps more widespread notoriety as a result of the Chinese occupation of Tibet. At any rate, I want to talk about some offering practices in Tibetan Buddhism that are suitable for beginning practitioners. And at first, I guess I should say that these are only two out of very, very many offering practices in the broader genre of Tibetan Buddhism, some of which are quite advanced and require special permissions or what are called empowerments to undertake, because they're so powerful that there is the potential for harm to come to the practitioner. And there's also a concern among the Tibetans that their more esoteric practices might be misinterpreted and perhaps maligned by people who are uninformed and not well versed in those practices. So they often require special permission to engage in the more esoteric, more advanced tantric or vajrayana practices, which all involve visualization and so on. And those empowerments always come from qualified lama or a rinpoche or other spiritual leader. Now, the first practice I want to talk about is the Mandala Offering, which there are many Mandala offerings, but the one that I want to discuss now is one of the Ngondro Preliminary Practices in the Nyingma school, or what's called the Old School of Tibetan Buddhism. The second practice that I want to talk about and introduce is a very simple yet profound and powerful daily practice, and that's the 7-bowl water offering. And it's one of the most common offering practices practiced in Tibetan Buddhism. And I should say that most Tibetans have a daily spiritual practice and almost always include offerings in their daily practice. The water bowl offering, as I mentioned, is a simple, easy to perform, yet it's incredibly powerful and auspicious, and it's widely practiced by members from all the major schools of Tibetan Buddhism. So it's not specific to one particular school. Like the Mandala offering that we'll be talking about today, it is more or less specific to the Nyingma tradition. That's the one that I'm most familiar with. I'm most widely read in the Nyingma school. So these offering practices, especially simple ones like the water bowl offering, are practices that can be done every day at home, at a home altar or a small shrine. They can also be done in the temple, and very many monks perform water offerings in the temples. And there are other simple practices like lighting a candle or offering the butter lamps. This is also a widespread practice. or sock offerings, or fire pujas, or placing flowers on the altar, offering a simple prayer, or perhaps with incense. All of these kinds of practices, even the most simple, can be imbued with a great deal of meaning and significance when we accompany them with the proper motivation. The proper motivation is absolutely essential. It's Tibetans would place the greatest emphasis on the quality of the mind rather than the material value of what you're giving, for example. So our intentions are, the purity of our intentions are absolutely essential, just very critical. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, these offering practices are not viewed as a simple exchange or acts of giving material items for which we receive something in return. No, 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 no. These have a far deeper purpose and symbolic meaning. For example, when we make offerings, we weaken our attachments and we purify our greed. We can visualize selfless acts of giving without any expectation of return, and this helps us generate higher levels of generosity, and it helps us detach from our material possessions, for example. And making offerings generates merit, or what I've called positive karma, which is absolutely essential for making progress along a spiritual path. Also, when we make offerings, the merit that we accumulate helps remove the obstacles, what the Tibetans call the obscurations to enlightenment. And the merit we cultivate or generate supports the cultivation of compassion and wisdom, which in Tibetan Buddhism go hand in hand. Compassion and wisdom are viewed as being like two sides of the same coin, and they're both essential for progress on a spiritual path. Finally, when we make offerings to the divine, we're training our minds to see the sacred in all things, and we're transforming our perceptions and allowing ourselves to see beyond the mundane toward our own enlightenment. It's through offering practices that we cultivate a mind of giving, we purify negativity, and we generate positive qualities in a positive environment that's conducive to our own awakening. And of course we do this not for our own awakening so much as we do it for the benefit and the awakening of others. This is critical. Now let's direct our attention to focus more specifically on the Mandala practice in the Nyingma school, which I want to talk about in mostly general terms, because this is a highly detailed and ritualistic practice that involves so many elements that proper instruction from a qualified lama or rinpoche or spiritual leader is strongly advised, highly recommended, because a qualified lama or rinpoche will make absolutely sure that you're connected to a genuine lineage and that you have the proper oral instructions and details on how to perform the Mandala offering correctly, and which of course includes all of the visualizations, the prayers, the ritual components, and so forth. So this isn't necessarily something that you can just read about in a book and start practicing, although you can. Empowerments are not strictly necessary to engage in the preliminary practices, which are meant to ready our mind and our emotional states for more advanced practices to come. But once again, it's very important to get proper instruction and to have the blessing of a lama to conduct in these practices, engage in these practices. Now, in the Mandala offering, We are constructing a symbolic representation of the entire universe, complete with all of its wealth and its beauty, and we offer this construct of this mental image, or we actually have a physical model of the universe that we create that we build up while we're doing the mandala practice, which we'll talk about in a second. But we offer this then to an infinite and vast array of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and Arhats and the entire community of believers and so on, which we call the field of merit. We visualize a field of merit, and very often you'll see Thangka paintings that have various fields of merit. They usually include a central figure, which may be Sakyamuni Buddha or Padmasambhava, Guru Rinpoche, or it could be a person's own root guru or a yidam deity that is in the center of the field of merit. But then we visualize this being a central figure there, being surrounded by a vast array of Bodhisattvas and Buddhas from the long lineage of Buddhas, all of the Buddhas, the infinite number of Buddhas across all universes. We visualize the lineage masters stretching back through time, and as I mentioned, all of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, the Dharma protectors, the Dakas and the Dakinis, who are heavenly embodiments of wisdom and bliss. I often think of the Dakas and the Dakinis as heavenly beings like angels, for example. We also can visualize the entire Sangha, or community of believers and followers, in this field of merit, this representation, and we may also include all sentient beings who are on a path ultimately to enlightenment also. And we include all sentient beings in order to remind us to dedicate the merit of our practices for their benefit, not just for ourselves. We're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for the benefit of everyone, of all beings, not just in our universe, but in a billion-fold universes, an infinite array of universes that might exist out there. The Tibetans believe in multiple universes. Now, in the mandala practice itself, we'll start with a base plate, which is usually made of silver or copper, and we'll stack rings upon this plate that are successively smaller. Maybe I can find a picture online that I'll put on the video so you can see it. And we fill these rings with symbolic items like rice or gems, or colored stones that represent gems, or other precious objects, for example, in a process of constructing a symbolic representation of the universe, which we're then going to offer to this vast array of enlightened ones and all sentient beings in our field of merit. And like I say, there's paintings or pictures. I've actually printed them from online and used them in my practices as an aid to visualizing this field of merit, which incidentally is called a field because it's like a place where you can plant the seeds for your own growth. And the Tibetans, like Jesus, believe that we reap what we sow. And when we engage in wholesome spiritual practices, this will ultimately lead to positive outcomes in our lives. So this base plate, as I mentioned, is made of silver or brass, and it's usually meticulously wiped clean. Sometimes practitioners will dip their finger in like saffron water and use that to clean the base plate, which is symbolic of clearing away our defilements. We'll mention this again, I think, a little later. Then, like I say, they take circular rings and stack them on top of the base plate, which forms a multi-level representation of the universe. Sometimes this is also seen as a representation of the Buddhist cosmology, with Mount Meru in the center and the four continents around and so forth. At any rate, after the first ring is placed on the plate, practitioners then might scoop a handful of rice or grains into the ring. These actions are always accompanied by a sort of brief prayer or mantra or a wish, a well wish for the universe, for others. For example, when they place rice on the mandala, it might signify their wish that all sentient beings will enjoy the abundance of the earth and an abundant harvest, for example, and or rice or grains could represent the mountains or lakes or lands that symbolize the wealth of the universe. And this should sound familiar to you if you watched my last video where I talked about despacho ceremonies. At any rate, other precious items then, like colored stones or even gold dust or jewels or crystals, which might symbolize precious jewels, they can also be added to the mandala and used to enhance the symbolism. And each layer of these successively smaller rings then represents another part of the universe, or a natural resource, or a precious source of joy, or so on. And of course, like I say, as they're doing this, verses will be chanted and used to invoke the deities and to consecrate the offering and to reaffirm our intentions. This is very important, and so on. Now, as the mandala gets constructed, each aspect represents the most beautiful parts of the universe. We imagine that every jewel, mountain, flower, and precious substance is being offered directly to the field of merit when we include it in the mandala. We imagine that these offerings are filling the space, the universe, the space around, and pleasing all enlightened beings, that they are receiving these offerings with joy, and they're receiving our offerings, and we imagine then that when they accept our offerings, that is generating immense merit and blessings, and that their joy of receiving our humble offering is reflected back to us, and that we receive it from them. So it's also radiated to all sentient beings, these positive, the whole thing is an exercise in positivity, and we realize, or we imagine that the blessings we receive is purifying all of our negative karma and our obscurations, but not only our negative karma and obscurations, but the negative karma and obscurations of all sentient beings, that it's going to benefit everyone in the multiverse, and that this is going to be auspicious for all beings. So, in a very important sense, this mandala offering is an act of purification. It's an act, a way of purifying, clearing away the negative obscurations in our own clinging and our own attachments and so forth. Finally, practitioners will often circle their hand around the mandala 3 times. This is usually done in a clockwise motion, and it represents offering the mandala to the three jewels or the three gems, which are the Buddha, the Dharma or the Buddha's teachings, and the noble Sangha or the community of all practitioners and believers. And of course, this offering has to be performed, as I mentioned, with the purest of intentions and motives. It's done with a spirit of generosity. Generosity is at the heart of this whole practice, and should probably say more about that in a moment. So, by offering this symbolic representation of the finest of the universe, the finest things in the universe, to the field of all enlightened beings, it's thought that we accumulate immeasurable merit or positive karma, and we're helping to overcome our own negative karma, which then the merit is seen to remove obstacles to enlightenment that helps us achieve spiritual realizations and make progress on a spiritual path. And as I said, it's seen to, we dedicate the merit for the benefit of all sentient beings so that it ultimately supports their enlightenment also. And when we give away the best and the most beautiful things that life has to offer in the universe, it fundamentally purifies our own greed and our attachments and our fears and our selfishness. So this mandala offering then, it fosters a profound sense of letting go, relinquishing our attachments, of giving up our clinging to our material possessions, and we give everything, as I'll mention in a moment, to the divine. Now, I should say that as a part of the Ngondro Preliminary Practices, Tibetans will practice this over and over again 100,000 times in their life. Some of them will go even further and do it 500,000 times. There are other preliminary practices in the Ngondro that they'll also do 100,000 times. For example, prostrations are one. So this is a repetitive ritual that's designed to build concentration and build devotion, and each time we do this offering then repetitively, it reminds us of our ultimate goal, which is to dedicate our life and our practice for the benefit of others. This is a central issue. There's also very many other benefits to doing this 100,000 times, and one of the reasons why they use a plate with these successively smaller rings is that it makes it easy for them to swipe these materials into their apron or the robe they're wearing, and so that they can continue and do it again. Of course, after you've done something like this 100,000 times, it won't take you but a millisecond to recall the benefits of it, and it makes it immediately present throughout the day and at any time we wish to recall it. Now, by making these mandala offerings, we're not only accumulating merit, we're also accumulating wisdom. As I mentioned, merit and wisdom are seen to go hand in hand in Tibetan Buddhism. Buddhahood, our innate Buddhahood, what they call Buddha mind or Buddha nature, it's the very embodiment of love and compassion and generosity and wisdom. So we have to realize that this is our true nature. It's who we really are. We all have Buddha nature. We all have Buddha mind. It's our true state. It's the basis for all of these practices. And it's what the Tibetans call our natural state. So we are making offerings to help us overcome the obstacles to realizing our inherent Buddhahood, our true nature. So we can transcend the egoic self and the sense of a separate self and realize the truth of our own divinity. That's the goal. And as I said, these practices are powerfully effective in clearing away the obscurations, the mental and emotional obscurations to enlightenment, and helping us make steady progress down a spiritual path. So they're highly recommended. So let's see, how does this work? It partly works through the cultivation of generosity, which is one of the 6 paramitas in Buddhism. When we give of ourselves and share generously, selflessly, it breaks down our own ego clinging. And if you've watched my previous videos, you'll know that most people are always grasping onto their attachments, their craving, outside recognition, they chasing after their wants and desires, or holding tightly on to their possessions, or holding back from expressing their true self, or so on. So when we assiduously cultivate and practice, and I mean systematically practice generosity, we loosen these tendencies to cling on to the things around us and to seek after and to stay on what I've called the hamster wheel. So we practice the Mandala Offering then so that we can give without clinging. When we offer to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas and the Arhats and all the enlightened beings all that we have, all of our possessions, our good qualities, and all the merit that we've accumulated, when we give these things away to sentient beings, it helps us cut through our own clinging and our attachments to material things. And in fact, we don't just offer our pitifully small possessions or what's in our bank accounts, or no. We, in this practice, make our offerings vast and limitless, and we give away the entire universe. We're not even that. We imagine giving away all of the good and beautiful things in the multiverse, and in all the infinite number of universes, the million universes, the billion universes. So we're making these offerings, as I say, so vast to include everything, even our own physical bodies. And this mandala then, when we do this for the benefit of all sentient beings, especially, we want to include especially those who we think of as our enemies, or those who, toward whom we might hold resentments or grudges. And when we make this mandala offering for the benefit of all sentient beings, we want to include especially our enemies. Jesus told us to love everyone, including our enemies, and he said this for good reason. The Tibetans also say this very many times in their literature. There is no room on the spiritual path for grudges or resentments or hatred. We make this mandala offering partly to benefit our enemies, purposely benefit our enemies. We include them also because they also deserve to know joy and the true causes of happiness. We want to wish them the very best also. So, for example, we might pray that the merit of our practice will benefit all sentient beings and lead them all onto the path toward liberation and Buddhahood. And, of course, we wish this for everyone, including our enemies. This is so important because it helps us overcome very often deep-seated obstacles to awakening, which might include all kinds of negative things I've talked about in the past. Besides grudges and resentments, it can include things like guilt and shame and previous trauma in our lives and so on. So these mandala offerings are partly meant to help us overcome these things by accumulating positive karma. It's the positive karma that helps eliminate the negative. And so this is why we're offering all of our possessions to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And as I mentioned, we're not only offering our possessions, but we're offering our own physical bodies and our speech and our minds, and we offer everything to the field of merit, holding nothing back. We want to include everything that's beautiful in the universe, and we offer all the delicate flowers and the beautiful gardens and the cool forests and the babbling brooks and the finest music and wonderful fragrances and perfectly delicious foods and the most precious gems, for example. We offer everything. We include it all. Because the divine is not, partly because the divine is certainly worthy of receiving all of the finest. So the mandala is a complete and total offering. It includes everything. It's the symbolic gift that we make with an open heart, and we share the fullness of this gift then with all sentient beings, as I imagine, without any reservations. We share everything, including all the galaxies and the suns and moons and stars and, of course, the Earth itself, the precious Mama Earth, Mother Earth. The mandala we construct then is an all-inclusive offering, as I mentioned, that we're giving to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the enlightened beings, and the Dakas and the Dakinis and the heavenly beings and all the members of the field of merit that we're visualizing. And in this process of giving everything away, we also imagine that we are fundamentally transformed, that this is transforming the nature of our own minds so that we are better able to transcend the egoic sense of a separate self. So I didn't mention that this base plate upon which we're building the mandala, it represents the ground of the universe also, and it also represents what's called, the Sanskrit term is alaya, which is the subconscious substrate, the subconscious storehouse of our past experiences, our habitual tendencies, samskaras, which are the habitual kind of grooves that we follow. It includes all of our past karmic imprints, and there's a lot of negative stuff in there that needs to be purified, so we want to clean up our past, and this mandala practice holds the potential for helping us clean up our negative karma and our past traumas. And again, it does this by generating positive merit or positive karma. For example, at the beginning of the mandala ceremony, when we wipe the base plate clean, it also represents purifying our subconscious and wiping away the negativity in our own storehouse of mental impressions. And as I mentioned, this negative storehouse is actually purified by engaging in positive activities like the holy virtues and the mandala practice itself. It's the virtues and our commitment to the virtues, our commitment to integrating the virtues into our lives and to lead authentic lives, our intention to become good and better persons, and our willingness to dedicate ourselves to doing that. This is what trains our minds and changes our conceptual frameworks and helps us make progress on the path. That's how these practices work. I'm going to say more about this in a future video. I'm thinking about maybe 2 or 3 videos ahead. So we accumulate merit then through this practice by focusing on generosity and morality and patience and perseverance, These are all part of the paramitas again. They help us accumulate wisdom then by fostering one-pointed contemplation and focused concentration, and of course generosity and concern for others. It lies at the heart of all of these offering practices. It's by making offerings and developing compassion for all sentient beings. This is how we eventually give up our own attachments and free ourselves from our own ego-centered, grasping minds, and which I mentioned, of course, is the source of all suffering. What is it I've said? Identification with the sense of a separate self is indeed the source of all suffering. It's the root cause of cycling through samsara. And what we're attempting to achieve is liberation from that. And of course this alludes to the deepest meaning of generosity. It's when we overcome our own selfish egocentrism and our selfish ways and develop sincere compassion and warm-hearted loving kindness for all sentient beings, and when we make offerings purely for the benefit of others. This is how we accumulate positive karma and diminish our attachments and train our minds. This is the logic and the rationale for these practices. It's why they work. The Tibetans will tell us that merit arises from virtuous actions and positive deeds and right conduct. This is part of the Buddha's original teachings, and that these are all necessary for us to realize our innate Buddha nature, our Buddha mind. Generosity, discipline, compassion, forbearance, concentration, all of these are considered part of the accumulation of merit. And so when we make offerings, we're creating the conditions for our minds to mature and to ripen toward enlightenment. Now, I had intended to talk about water bowl offerings, the Tibetan practice, a beautiful practice of water bowl offerings, but this video has gone on long enough, so I think we better reserve that discussion for the next video. So, as always, thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next video, and support the channel by telling your friends about us. And until next time, I hope you will strongly consider making offerings a part of your daily practice. They're so powerful. And now that I've told you the rationale and how they work, you could actually create your own offering practice to include in your spiritual practice. Or, as I've said, you can go and seek out a qualified lama and learn the particulars and the details of the Tibetan Mandala practice. So take care, and we'll see you next time here on Journey of Self-Awareness. Bye-bye.